Okay, so last night we heard. I really enjoyed Ratna Ghosh's evocation of tradition, and he quoted from the not from the Adhisthana website, but it was on the Adhisthana website. Tradition is the handing on of the flame, not the worship of the ashes. And it's really great to be here on this weekend, long weekend with all of you. What we're concerned about here, what we're here together. The reason we're here together, I guess, is because we're concerned with this handing on of the flame. And I know there's changemakers and groups of pioneers, but you're all changemakers, actually. So I'd really like to rejoice in the fact that it's on here and in all of you for coming. It's really great. And as Prakasha Mitra has said, that I've been involved in the movement for over 2 decades now, and I've worked in the centre in Dublin since 2002. And I'm just a really big fan of the what we call in Triratna the lineage of responsibility. Taking responsibility, helping share the Dharma. It's made me the person I am, I think. It's made me the person I am. And like who was it last night was talking about how the responsibility has transformed her? My brain's gone blank in her name. Pranyanita, I'm sorry, Pranyanita. Yes, Pranyanita was really inspiring last night as well, just talking about the change that taking responsibility like that had made for her. So anyway, so I'm really, really happy to be here this weekend. And at the same time, I think it's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is just being clear. What are we trying to do when we are passing on the flame? That's what the system of practice really supports. What are we trying to do when we're passing on the flame? And when you work in the institutions over the years, sometimes you just have to stop and think, what the hell am I doing here? What am I meant to be doing here, rather? Like you kind of lose your way a bit. And every now and again, you have to clarify what it is you're trying to do. And I messaged Changemakers last week asking him, what are we trying to do as changemakers? And he said, we're trying to induct people into the Dharma. Now, I've never used the word induct in a normal sentence, so I had to look it up just to be really clear. So it sounds slightly sinister, but when you look at the meaning of it, it actually means to welcome, to receive, to initiate, which makes it a lot better. So sadhu to Changemakers' greater vocabulary. Where's Changemakers? At the back there, yeah. So we're trying to welcome, we're trying to receive, we're trying to initiate people into the Dharma, and particularly within the context of our institutions. So when I think of the path of responsibility, I think of institutions, basically. That's the main way in which I think that manifests. And institution and system of practice are slightly boring words on the surface of it, but actually, whenever I have to step back and think, what is an institution? I always come back to Padmavadra's definition of what we're trying to do with our institutions. And he talks about this in his talk, What is a Mitra? And he says the function of the institutions is to create situations where people can experience the Dharma vividly. So we're trying to create situations where people can experience the Dharma vividly. So if you ever feel frustrated working in the movement or wondering what the hell you're doing, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to create situations where people experience the Dharma vividly. And I've always found it really useful to come back and keep reminding myself of this every day, or as much as I need to, but even every day, And of course, then we have Subhuti's saying that the institutions only really function to the degree, I'm paraphrasing him here a little bit, the institutions only really function to the degree that they're informed by Kalyana Mitrata, that they're vitalized by Kalyana Mitrata. So we're trying to create these situations where people can have a vivid experience of the Dharma, but in a way that's infused with the radiance of Kalyana Mitrata and friendship and spiritual friendship. And I'm really glad Vajrashura is going to be talking about Kalyana Mitrata tonight, isn't it? Yeah, great. But today I'm talking about the system of practice. And what I'm going to explore is that we need it's really good to be really clear about the system of practice that we have in Triratna and be clear what it actually is. I was just chatting to Vajrashura beforehand that it's not always entirely clearly defined, so I'm going to make my best stab at it. So what I want to talk about in this talk is how a system of practice can help people have this vivid experience of the Dharma. Yeah. And I want to talk a little bit about how our system of practice developed and different aspects of it. In particular, what Subhuti has called the 5 aspects of the Triratna system of Dharma life, which is a bit of a mouthful, but there you go. It's the 5 aspects of the Triratna system of Dharma life. And I want to talk about how we can, in a way, give people a vivid experience of each aspect of the system of practice. Yeah. and why it's necessary that we have this. Yeah. Okay, so what is a system of practice? So you could say a system of practice is a kind of a system or a schema or some way of looking at things that link up all the practices that we do, that link up all the different things that we do. And when I say practices, I don't just mean meditation practices, I mean all the practices that we do. It gives us a context to understand why we do all the different things that we do. Why do we do the mindfulness of breathing? Why do we do spiritual friendship? Why do we do reporting Zen? Why do we do all these different things that we do? So it gives us a context. And the context, obviously, for Buddhists is that we're looking to become liberated. We're looking to develop the mind of the Buddha. It helps us understand why we're doing a particular practice, at least generally. It gives us a clear sense of what we're trying to move towards with each practice when we have the system of practice and how to make the next step. And then it gives us a common language that we can share our inspirations and talk about our difficulties and so on with each other. A system of practice is necessary for Sangha. And there's always systems of practice in any coherent Buddhist tradition. So, for example, going back to the Buddha had a system of meditation, which was, when you had the 5 poisons, he had 5 meditation practices that countered each of those poisons. So, for distraction, you had the mindfulness of breathing. For hatred, you had the metta bhavana. For craving, you had the contemplation of the unpleasant, like the decomposition of the corpse. For conceit, comparing oneself to others, you had the 6-element practice. And for ignorance, you had contemplation of conditionality. So they were all different practices that the Buddha gave to tackle each of the 5 poisons. And Bhante was always very concerned as well, and he had many conversations with his teachers about a system of practice to make sense of all the different practices that he got, particularly as he accumulated, doesn't seem the right word, but took on more and more practices as well from his teachers. And he would have chats with people like Lama Govinda, who he's a very good friend with. I just want to read out one of his insights about meditation practices. He said, listening to Lama Govinda, he said he realized, it was not that taking on a new practice, one discarded the old practice and put it behind one, so to speak. What one did was add the new practice to the old and incorporate both into a higher unity. In this way, one's meditation or spiritual practice would, over the years, gradually become an ever richer and more complex thing. And he compared this to like building up a mandala of practices, so he could see how they all fitted together in a beautiful and in a whole, you could say, WHOLE. And over the next while, he developed, particularly talking to Yogi Chen, one of his teachers, and studying the Vijnanavada and the Yogacara together, he developed what he called the 5 principal stages of the spiritual life. And you could see this as a precursor to what Subhuti has more recently spelled out in his lectures. So these were, they're slightly different. He talks about integration, positive emotion, vision, and in vision he included spiritual death and spiritual rebirth, transformation, which comes out of that vision, and compassionate activity. So it's a bit different to what I'm going to talk about in a bit, but really it's kind of just an earlier evolution of our system, of the aspects of our system. And he explored these with the order around the mid-70s, around 1976 in particular. I think in seminars like the Precious Garland. I might have that date slightly wrong, but I think it's around 76. And he linked them up to other things like the 5 spiritual faculties and so on. And then in 1978, Bhante gave a lecture called The System of Meditation, which you're probably more familiar with. And he talks about in meditation, we can have a system that makes it all fit together. And you could say that when it comes to meditation, what we're trying to do is we're trying to start out with integration, becoming more whole, becoming more one person walking one path, then emotionally positive, then letting go of things in spiritual death, opening to new ways of being and the Buddhas in spiritual rebirth, and then balancing all that with just sitting. Yeah, so I'm not going to go into that in much more detail than that now, but it gave a way of understanding different meditation practices that people were doing in our tradition. And I think Bhante was concerned in the early days in particular that people would drift apart. People would over-identify with meditation practices that they were doing. He was very concerned with keeping it all linked up. So, he gave this system of meditation, which is a sequential, step-by-step, each phase of it growing out of the previous stage, And it really helps become really clear, what are you practicing now? How does it fit into the overall scheme? What do I really need to do right now? And I've really found the system of meditation useful when I first came along and was really inspired by meditation. So it's a good lecture to go back to and listen to, obviously. And then in 2009, Bhante released his paper with Subhuti helping him, What is the Western Buddhist Order? And he talked about how every Sangha presupposes a Dharma. So he's saying that every Sangha has its own system of Dharma. And they will be different. Every Sangha will have a different system of Dharma. That's fine. But he said that the Dharma needs to be specific to a particular Sangha. It needs to hang together doctrinally and methodologically if it is to be basis of a Sangha or order. Everyone needs to be following the same founding teacher, be guided by the same doctrinal understanding of the Dharma, and undertaking broadly the same set of practices. If they do not do that, they will not have sufficient in common to be an effective Sangha, and will not be able to make progress together on the path. So he's saying that unless we have a really clear system of practice, a really clear way of practicing together, we won't be an effective Sangha. And if we're not an effective Sangha, we won't be able to do much in the world. We won't be able to bring the Dharma to the world. And not only that, but more personally, we won't be able to make much progress ourselves on the path. Yeah? And in this system of practice, as I'm going to call it, there's different terms for it, but let's just call it the system of practice. He included in that all the distinctive things about Triratna that I'm not going to talk about here very much. The centrality of going for refuge, the conditionality as a core expression of the Dharma, the importance of spiritual friendship, the importance of the arts, and so on and so on. Yeah. And they're all kind of aspects of what is our core set of the system. What is the system of practice? And then out of this, and here ended the history lesson, you'll be happy to hear, out of this, Subhuti further developed this when he published a series of lectures in Padmaloka, or he gave a series of lectures in Padmaloka called Sangharakshita's System of Dharma Life, where he talks about the five aspects of the spiritual life. And in particular, he gave those in the context of moving from what he called karma niyama processes, working at the level of karma, working at the level of willed intention, to allowing something else to emerge, dharma niyama processes, something selfless manifesting when we get out of the way at a karmic level. You could say bodhicitta, selfless activity in the service of the good. So I'm going to spend a bit of time focusing on these five because I think there's really good things we can draw out of each of them. But you could say these five aspects, along with all those emphases, spiritual friendship, going for refuge being central, they're generally what we mean as a system of practice in Triratna. Okay, it is a bit kind of nebulous, but they all hang together. It's a way of making sure they all hang together in a coherent whole. So the first aspect of the system of Dharma life is integration. So integration, we've all probably come across integration. I'm not going to go into these in great detail, but it's bringing together of all the different selves that we experience. Yeah, and Bhante, in a kind of pokily said once, we are usually just a bundle of conflicting desires and selves, both conscious and unconscious, loosely tied together with a thread of a name and an address. So I think it's really good. So we're usually just a bundle of conflicting desires and selves. So I was just moaning to Jnanadhara this morning how I hate getting up for meditation for 7 o'clock. So I was a bundle of conflicting selves this morning. I wanted to go to meditation and I didn't want to go to meditation. Well, I didn't want to get out of my bed, more specifically. So to do anything well, and I did get out of bed, but just to say, to do anything well, but especially to go for refuge, we need to be able to act wholeheartedly. We need to be able to act with the fullness of ourselves. Yeah, we're one person walking one path, and we need to be able to bring ourselves as much of ourselves as possible into our Dharma lives. In a way, integration is working against the compartmentalization that we do in our lives. So with some people we're a Buddhist, with other people we party, with other people we're the good son or daughter. You know what I mean? So we're different people in different situations. So integration is about bringing down the walls between the different parts of our lives and walking one path. Bhante talks about an image from Milarepa, that we're like a shepherd with a sheepdog trying to herd together all the sheep, so they're all moving in the one direction. And you can well imagine how easy it is for sheep to run off in different directions. Yeah. And in meditation, this is the practice of mindfulness, especially mindfulness of the body and mindfulness of breathing. But more generally, you can say it's the work, of taking responsibility at an ethical level, at a karmic level for our actions. So realizing that we're a karmic agent, we have to work with our samskaras, we have to work with our volitional tendencies, we need to take responsibility for what we do, we need to take responsibility for what we desire to do. And it's about keeping your word, and it's about really trying to make sure that your actions line up with your aspirations. So your actions line up with your aspirations. Yeah. And the best way, I think, to do this is one of the best ways to integrate yourself, or to become more integrated rather, is to have a central organizing principle in your life, to have something in your life of central importance that you orientate your life around. And obviously for Buddhists, this is going for refuge. So putting going for refuge at the center of your life, really trying to orientate your life around going for refuge, will help bring together all the different aspects of yourself into a more harmonious and happy whole. And so with each of these stages, I want to talk, well, what can we're all meeting newcomers, we're all meeting people in our centers and groups. So what do we want to communicate about integration? I'm not going to go into specifics of practices here. You could do that in the groups if you wanted. But really, the first thing we're trying to communicate really simply is that it's better to be integrated than not integrated. Yeah, and people don't usually need much convincing of this, okay? We teach them meditation well so that they can become less scattered and more mindful. We're also showing them that their actions matter, that they're ethical agents, that to really live a truly human life, you need to move from blame to taking responsibility, from feeling like a victim to feeling like you have ethical initiative. Yeah, we need to help them clarify that their actions have effects. Yeah, and we're communicating a vision of a life based upon awareness and kindness and vision. Yeah, so really helping them realize they're ethical agents. And we're also helping them clarify what is most important in life. What is most important in life? You're trying to, in a way, we're trying to activate that central integrating principle that they can organize their lives around. And it's actually rather easy in my experience for people to get in touch with what's important and what's meaningful in life. It's not easy to keep that going in a sustained way. So we're trying to provide conditions for them to stay in touch with that. And one of the best ways we can do that is Sangha. You know, Sangha is a place where I've been thinking about Sangha, but I'm giving a talk next Sangha night in Dublin. And one of the things I've been thinking about Sangha is how important it is that we have a place where we can see idealism in other people, and we can have that idealism in ourselves witnessed by others. There's a real power and a magic in witnessing that I think we can underestimate. And Sangha is a mutual witnessing. One way of looking at Sangha is a mutual witnessing of what we aspire to in life. And that has a powerful integrating effect. Yeah. Okay, so positive emotion then. Positive emotion is the cultivation, you could say, of positive states of mind, positive emotional states, or to be more technically precise, it's the cultivation of skillful intentions or skillful volitions. And we're continuing the work with integration, but we're trying to be more specific about avoiding unskillful states of mind and cultivating skillful states of mind. And at its most basic, it's the cultivation of metta. It's the cultivation of metta. Metta bhavana is one of the first things we teach in centres, and it's of core importance in terms of skillful volition. And metta can flower into all kinds of other things. Metta is like at the basis of most skillful volitions, or if not all, and it can flower into its variations of compassion, karuna, sympathetic joy, mudita, upekkha, equanimity, shraddha, confidence in the three jewels. And with the positive emotion, we're trying to overcome our deep-rooted kleshas, our deep-rooted poisons in our mind, those deep-rooted tendencies towards irritability and hatred and craving and conceit. So we're trying to uproot these and develop the flavor of metta. So as changemakers, when we're meeting people, what we're trying to communicate really is a vision of moving from, as Bhante calls it, a reactive mind to a creative mind. Yeah, I do think more and more as I look at Bhante's material, I think that's one of the most important paradigms that Bhante's offered us, moving from a reactive mind to a creative mind. I'd really encourage you to read Bhante's lecture, Mind, Reactive and Creative. I think it's really got the whole of Buddhism in it, actually. Yeah. So we're trying to communicate to people that it's possible to move from negativity to positivity. It's possible to not be irritable all the time. You know what I mean? I was really irritable when I came along first. And it's possible not to it's possible even in difficult conditions to be creative. And as Bhante says, the creative mind loves where there is no reason to love, is creative where there is no possibility of creativity. And it's been clear that the Buddha said it's really possible to undermine and even eradicate negative states of mind, the kleshas. So we're offering the metta bhavana, we're offering the practice of metta, and I think the metta bhavana isn't always an easy practice for people. And I think one of the best things we can do is just do the metta bhavana ourselves, be able to talk about it with people, share our experience of metta and our difficulties with metta, and hear how they are getting on with the metta bhavana. Again, it's really practical, but it's just such a key thing for helping people really experience positive emotion. And then, of course, the other thing that we do is friendship and sangha, helping people learn to relate to each other in a different way. A community, learning how to enter into a community of love and awareness of each other. And I think this is why teaching on teams is really important too. When I first came along, really what I wanted was what I saw, or the kind of relationships that order members had with each other. That's what I wanted. That's why I really wanted Sangha. And on young Buddhist teams or on teaching in groups or centres, that's the best thing we can offer, that kind of vision of friendship. Okay, so then there's spiritual receptivity, and this is sometimes called the stage of no effort, or the stage of no more effort, spiritual receptivity, dharmic responsiveness. And in meditation, it's about being able to let go and dwell with the mind in a spacious and open way, particularly in the practice or non-practice of just sitting. And it also highlights the importance of a balanced effort, that we're not always striving. So just sitting is really important. But more generally, it's about how when we've cultivated an integrated and positive mind, we're able to be just able to dwell and be with experience. We have a mind that is simply able to happily be. Yeah, simply be able to be open to things. And in particular, Subhuti talks about this quite a lot in his lecture, about how we can be open to what's truly beautiful, to what's truly kalyana. In a way, you could say it's that our minds in spiritual receptivity, we're able to be open to the more subtle and deeper currents of life, yeah, beyond the usual busyness and running around and being blown around by the worldly winds. So we're able to be open to the more subtle and deeper currents of life, the deeper beauty and value that's intrinsic in life. And we're able to do this because we're positive enough and integrated enough that we can just dwell and wait for these deeper currents to become more clear to us, to become more visible, to experience them more. There's a kind of a clarity at a karmic level that something deeper can start to shine through, that's usually blocked out by all our, worry and flurry and running hither and thither. So this subtle kind of deeper meaning is easily drowned out by the noise of life. And we need to come to a space where we can hear this deeper music, you could say. So when we're communicating to our centres, to people in our centres and groups, I think one of the first things really practically is we need to encourage people just to learn to be able to sit with themselves. Yeah. And so many people these days, I think it's one of the main things that I see with people coming these days, is just they never, ever stop. They never stop consuming media, in particular on phones and things like that, or video or whatever it is. They never stop consuming food. They never stop running from this to that. People never, never stop. And even when they're sitting on the couch exhausted, they're watching telly or something else. You know what I mean? And it's really hard to put down the phone, isn't it, sometimes? Well, a lot of the time it's really hard to put down your phone, And I think one of the biggest challenges we have is helping people just to stop and be able to just be and dwell in what Bhante calls the greater mandala. Yeah, And I actually increasingly think it's very difficult to do this unless you can get people on retreat. Yeah, I'm not convinced that it's really possible to give people a sustained vision of this without getting them on retreat. So I think part of our job is getting people on retreats where they can just experience themselves in a different kind of way. Yeah, and we can also try and embody this ourselves. So I think maybe jumping ahead a bit to spiritual rebirth, but faith and confidence in the Dharma can help us just be very centered when we're teaching, kind of coming from a place of stillness as well, positive, vibrant stillness too. And I think also we can experience this with them. Subhuti has this term Sangakaya, the body of Sangha. And it's where, as a Sangha, we have a particular mood or flavor or atmosphere. For me, with newcomers, I think it's that feeling after you do meditation and you ring the bells to end and you come out of your posture, and then you just sit there for a few minutes. And you just everyone's just sitting in the stillness of having meditated together with nothing else to do. That's the kind of flavor that I'm talking about. Yeah. And one of the most important things I think we can do as well in relation to spiritual receptivity is give people confidence in the deeper nature of their minds. People are very caught up with the surface level chop of existence, the waves that are very, very stormy at times, are very strong. And I think we're trying to show people that there's the deeper, vast, rich deepness of the ocean of the mind underneath those. And yet people only tend to exist at a very surface level a lot of the time. The image for me is of that, we have a stream of water that we're continually pouring pollutants into, or food dyes into. But we're trying to encourage people to give that mind the space so that if we stop pouring those pollutants in, the mind will run clear. And that we can have confidence in that deeper nature of mind, that with the right conditions, if we stop doing the things we're doing, the mind will run clear and bright. It's almost like a pointing out instruction, you could say. We're pointing people to something deeper in their minds that they can have confidence in. They can dwell in the blue sky of the mind. So really we're trying to give confidence that people can just be with themselves, because it's often the most terrifying thing you can ask people to do. So anyways, that's spiritual receptivity. And then, having developed a happy, healthy human being, the next thing we have to do then is die. Yeah, spiritually speaking. So spiritual death. We start seeing through our fixed sense of selfhood. We start to see through our sense of being separate from each other. We start to see that the states of mind that we experience are not me or mine. They arise, they pass away. We learn not to identify so much with particular states of mind and kind of dwell in a bigger sense of things. And we start to see that the world can't make us happy on its own terms. We start to see that samsara is unreliable. It can't bring us happiness. No amount of scrolling on Instagram will make us happy. We start to see through the promises of the world. And we start to see through our own patterns of behavior. And meditation-wise, the traditional practice for this is the 6-element practice. So it's a practice you usually do close to just before ordination or after ordination. Or reflection on the nidanas was a practice I learned on my ordination retreat. We don't do it much these days anymore, but it's a good practice. Or there's also reflection on the lakshanas or many other insight practices we can do. But really, they all involve a letting go. They all involve a dying of an old way of being. You could say that karma, or working to cultivate integration, skillful intention and receptivity, karma has brought us as far as it can, and now we need to let it die for something deeper to shine through again. And we're moving beyond grasper and grasped. We're moving beyond grasper and grasped. We're moving beyond, we're breaking through the kleshas. So we're not going to be teaching the 6-element practice. We probably don't even know the 6-element practice, most of us. But one of the interesting things Subhuti said in one of his lectures then is that we should be teaching all these stages at all levels. So we should actually be communicating something of spiritual death to newcomers, to relative newcomers, to people who've only been around a short while. So obviously we're not going to teach them the 6-element practice, but we can encourage a regular practice of reflection and just looking at their experience more. Reflection is really powerful. And we can offer them ways to reflect, like a really simple one is, well, when you get upset, why do you take things so personally? Why take things so personally? Why do you feel you have to do that? It's like a simple version of the reaction practice, if you're familiar with the reaction practice. What stories are you telling yourself to validate your actions? So whenever you act, you're acting on the basis of a story or a view. So what is that story? Encouraging people to look at those stories. That's a form of reflection that leads to spiritual death, that leads to a freeing up. Why do I need to have the victory here? Why do I take defeat so to heart? So Buddhist texts talk about going beyond defeat and victory, going beyond victory and defeat. So simple reflections like this can really help. In meditation, can they dwell with their ever-changing breath? Can you really open to the mystery of another human being in the metabhavana? That's an insight practice, I would say. That's spiritual death too. And I think one of the main things at a basic level spiritual death can mean for newcomers, and for us too indeed, is just that we don't need to identify with the contents of our experience. We don't need to identify with the contents of our experience. We don't need to identify with our emotions. Our emotions are part of us, but they're not the fullness of us. We can experience them, allow them to pass, allow them to arise, pass, and dissolve away again. We don't need to identify with our thoughts. Very simple insight practice that you can introduce people to is to reflect on the fact, when the last time you were happy and not thinking, did you exist? Or were you there, maybe is a better way of putting it. Were you still there? People often think if they stop thinking, they'll disappear in a puff. But you're still there, aren't you? You're just, free of having to identify with thoughts. I mean that very poetically. Don't take that too doctrinally now. You being there. Can you let go into the blue sky of your mind? I think those are really simple ways to introduce spiritual death to people. And it's necessary that we talk like that we introduce that level, that it's not just the technique of following your breath. There's a deeper sense of what you're trying to do. And obviously you're trying to avoid falling into the near enemy of this, which is alienation. You do need to experience those things, but you don't identify so strongly with them. And I think this can be a really profound experience of spiritual death for people that's safe and accessible for anyone who comes along. Yeah. And then we have spiritual rebirth. So here, when we've moved beyond the confines of the narrow self, something else comes into play. Something else beyond what the self could ever imagine starts to manifest more and more. And qualities of compassion, love, wisdom, energy, patience all come into a deeper expression. And particularly we find this embodied in the form of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But whatever form that takes, our energies are awakened to the real possibility of enlightenment. There's something activated within us that resonates with enlightenment more. And to use Subhuti's terms, one comes to act more from the Dharma niyama than the level of personal karmic choice or actions, So something else, something deeper is informing how you are in the world. And the traditional practices would be the visualization of the Buddha or Bodhisattva. Like at ordination, I took on the practice of White Tara. But there's also, of course, when you're training for ordination, the going for refuge and prostration practice. But really, I think we don't need those practices to introduce spiritual rebirth to people. So on my very first retreat, I was a militant atheist when I first started meditating. And it took me, a friend of mine kind of tricked me into meditating, but there you go. So that's another story. But I really enjoyed it, but I really didn't want anything to do with Buddhism. But I started slowly coming around. And on my first retreat, I remember after the puja on the second night, I think it was a 3-day retreat, I remember wandering around in the dark outside the retreat center and bowing to trees. I found myself bowing against the trees, and I found myself having an intense joy at finding something in the universe that I could bow to. Yeah, I'm not saying we should all bow to trees, but it's more like I found that I could have reverence again. I could look up to something, and I was bowing to the magnificence of the big trees growing in the place. But I was bowing to just a sense of a universe where I wasn't the pinnacle of existence, because that is a very, very depressing universe indeed. Yeah. So what we're trying to do with people is to encourage them with spiritual rebirth, that there's something in the universe that they can bow to. Yeah, really, really important. There's something in the universe that they can bow to. And obviously we might need to we might not put it as explicitly as that, or you might, it's up to you, I don't think we have to make it explicit, but we can just show that there is something in the universe to bow to. I often talk about the vastness of mind that's possible, that's far beyond the normal mind. and far beyond anything the normal mind can understand. But I'd really encourage them to bow to the Buddha as well, the Buddha being the representation of what their mind can achieve. You could say, it's them at the end of their spiritual journey, and so on. And when I'm on retreat, I encourage people to, if they haven't bowed before, to go into the shrine room and do some sneaky bows just to see what it's like when nobody's around. Yeah? Because I think actually it's more of an idea often, our resistance to bowing. It's actually a very, very enjoyable, very, very pleasurable thing to bow. Yeah? And we can encourage people as well just to have confidence in the Buddha as a teacher. All the teachings have come down to him. And confidence in Bhante as well. I think it's really good to rejoice in the Buddha, to rejoice in Bhante. We've been given some really profound teachings to live our lives by, to transform our lives. So let's really rejoice in that. And encourage people as well, if people make connections to particular figures, really encourage them they don't have to explain their feelings for figures. They don't have to explain why they want to bow. They don't have to explain why they have feelings of reverence. The more you explain it in a way, the more you're in danger of destroying it, actually. So yeah, just do all this as, encourage all this as self-consciously as you can. So they're the 5 stages, and then just a few final points. So we've just that's kind of the main points of the system of practice, and I think it's a really, really good system. It's step by step. It's even spiral-like in a way. You integrate, you become. It doesn't always work as cleanly as, but generally, integration leads to positive emotion, leads to spiritual receptivity, leads to spiritual death, leads to spiritual rebirth, and within all that, there's spiritual receptivity, and then you come around to a new level of integration again, and so on. And we don't need to perfect one stage to go on to the next. We can be working at all levels as well, which is a bit of a relief, because I still haven't perfected being integrated and being a whole. Yeah, it's organic, and every step arises naturally out of the previous, and it has a whole path from the beginning all the way up to enlightenment in there. Also, if we go into any of the stages, all the other stages emerge. If you really go deeply into the metta bhavana, you'll start to have spiritual death experiences in terms of, well, what is another person? What am I in relation to that person? You'll start to experience deep spiritual receptivity the more you practice metta, because in a way, a lot of metta is just getting yourself out of the way for something deeper, to a deeper caring to emerge. You'll experience the love of the Buddha even if you practice metta bhavana enough. So all the other stages emerge out of any of the stages. And it is really an organic living system. Don't get rigid or over-literalize it. It needs a kind of a creative flexibility in relation to it. And it makes sense of all the different practices that we come across. And it can even help in new practices. And some of the work I do for Sika, who I work for, is looking at how new practices come in. And it's all about the system of practice. How do they all fit into our system of practice? So I think Bhante is a genius. I was thinking about this earlier this week, that, I think with teachings from Bhante, like how going for refuge is a central act of being a Buddhist, for me, he's made sense of all the different schools of Buddhism, that they're all an expression of going for refuge. And then with the system of practice, he's explained how all the different practices within a tradition fit together. I think it's really, really, it's just genius, really. So when we're trying to communicate the Dharma, we're trying to communicate we're trying to communicate 3 things. Yeah, we're trying to communicate what Bhante calls a vision of existence. A vision of existence. We're trying to communicate in that, like, a path of developing, becoming a Buddha, having the mind of a Buddha. Yeah, that's the first thing. The second thing is that we're trying to communicate all the practices that are an expression of this, that lead to this. So we're communicating a vision, and we're communicating how to realize that vision. And all practices need to be informed by that vision. Practice without vision is just a technique. Yeah, and all practices should point beyond them in a way to the vision. Yeah, so all practices should always point towards them. So the mindfulness of breathing, ideally, should always point beyond itself to what it's like to live with a deep, integrated, vibrant, unshakable awareness at all times, yeah? Like the Buddha would. The metta bhavana should point beyond itself to a life imbued with radiant positivity and love for all life. Yeah. So we're always trying to be in touch with this vision and communicate from it when we're communicating the Dharma. And a practice without vision is almost useless. Yeah, it's almost useless, I would say. to be a little bit provocative. And I think if we don't have this, the system of practice provides this overall vision or context. Without it, we fall into mere techniques. And maybe it's fine to be in a technique, but the thing is, with any technique, it'll run dry at some point. And without the kind of underlying vision of why you're doing it, you can lose confidence very easily. So they're the first two things. But the third thing we're trying to communicate is confidence. Yeah, the third thing we're trying to communicate is confidence. So we have a vision, and we have the practices that lead to that vision. But we do also need to communicate that we have confidence ourselves in that vision, that it's realizable, and we have confidence in the practices that lead to that vision. Yeah, if we don't have that confidence, I don't think people will really take to the Dharma as easily. They might still, because often it's enough just to hear the vision. But really, confidence is a lot of the time what we're trying to communicate in our groups. Yeah. And I'm not talking about a flashy cheerleading or anything like that, but I think what I mean here really is a quiet confidence that this is more than sufficient to gain enlightenment. What we have is more than enough to gain enlightenment. It's more than enough to live a rich and truly human life. I think Dharma is going to talk more tomorrow about inspiration, which is another way of looking at confidence. But really, how we have confidence in the system of practice is not necessarily that we know what to say to people, that we know how to teach the mindfulness of breathing well. It's that all these different aspects, integration, positive emotion, spiritual receptivity, spiritual death, spiritual rebirth, they're all alive in us in our own practice. That's where confidence comes from. I mean, it's good to be confident in your teaching techniques. It's really good to do that. But a deeper confidence comes from a confidence in the Dharma and in the system of practice. So I'd really encourage you just to make sure that all these aspects are alive in some way in your practice. Yeah, and it might feel like a lot, and I don't want you to feel overwhelmed or anything like that. But actually, it's a really enjoyable thing. Just you don't have to get it all tomorrow. You know what I mean, or by the end of the retreat. Just look and see, are all these aspects alive in your practice? And if it's one thing I'd really like you to do is just to develop this confidence in the practice, confidence in the system of practice. And as changemakers, one of the things you're trying to do is promote and uphold the system of practice. In a way, you're carrying on the flame. The system of practice is a flame. You're carrying that on. Yeah. Even if your teaching isn't great, I think confidence communicates more than you think. Yeah. So the clarity that the system of practice brings will give you confidence. And the system of practice isn't just important for our own teaching, but it's important for the order as well. Bhante talks about a high degree of commonality. We are a united spiritual community, he says, so we need to keep a common body of practice, a common vocabulary of practice. And the system of practice allows Sangha. We have a common language to talk to each other. But also there's something much deeper than how we communicate to each other. When we have a common body of practices that we do together, there's something that happens in a room. Vajrashura was just saying to me, didn't it feel really still this morning in the shrine room? Yeah. And there's something that happens when we're all practicing together in a particular kind of way. Maybe it's that Sangakaya thing that I mentioned earlier that Subhuti talks about. There's a deeper harmony that emerges beyond even having to talk about things. In the Buddhist texts, this is exemplified by Anuruddha and Nandya and Kimbala in the Mahagosinga Sutta. They're practicing in such deep harmony. They don't even need to talk about it. They understand each other's minds and they're enlightened together. So that's what, in a way, that's what a system of practice allows and encourages, this kind of deep harmony. And the last thing I'll say then more practically is that the system of practice really helps us to respond to people who come to our centres. So you've probably seen this before, but there's no such thing as a newcomer anymore in our centres. Yeah, everyone has come across meditation and some kind of spiritual teachings before. And what I see more and more is people coming from things like non-dual teachers or coming from Vipassana retreats, and maybe some of you came those paths as well. And that's completely fine if you come from those paths. But I was studying with Nyanavacha, and Nyanavacha was leading study on the college meeting back in November, and he was saying that his YouTube feed is just awash with non-dual teachers. I have to say his YouTube feed is much healthier than mine, but anyways. But it's just like there's so many non-dual teachers out there now, you know what I mean? And there's so many people coming to us having come across all kinds of teachings, and the system of practice we need to have confidence in the system of practice that we can meet that. Just one example, one example, there's a very good, bright young woman who's come to the centre, and she had come from the non-dual tradition, and she was of the view that, well, isn't any effort that you're making an effort of the ego, and thereby, tainted or on, something you shouldn't do. And from a certain perspective, that's true, but it's an unhelpful view, actually, for practice. So, we were just exploring with her, well, isn't it good to be ethical in the world? Isn't it necessary to live out of awareness and kindness? So that's integration, you could say. And she was doing the metta bhavana, and I was just exploring with her the benefits that she'd seen from that. She couldn't deny those. And eventually, yes, we need to be able to have spiritual receptivity and dwell in something. But there is a trap there. There's a trap that people with a kind of a non-dualistic dogma that we get trapped into where all effort is useless. So because we have the system of practice, we know how to respond to that. Or with Vipassana teachings, Vipassana retreats sound really good, but there's no Sangha and there's no way of sustaining the insights that you have. So you need a broader system of practice to really permeate your whole life. And without integration, positive emotion, it's very hard to have meaningful spiritual depth. So again, the system of practice just really helps us respond to the people and be effective change makers. So anyways, main talk, I'll stop now. The main thing I really want you to take away, have confidence in the system of practice. It works, it's practical, it's visionary, it encompasses the whole of the spiritual life, and really bring it alive in your own practice, and then you can't help but communicate that to others. Thank you.